page 16 if you want to see the translation of this beautiful song. Zameru l'Adonai b'chinor, b'chinor v'kol zimra, b'chatzotzrot v'kol shofar. Hariu lifnei HaMelech Adonai, zameru. You can add harmony, zameru. Yiram hayam umlo, teivel veyoshveva, necharot yimcha uchaf, yachad harim yeraneinu, zameru. לפני אדוני קיווה, לשפוט הארץ, לשפוט תבל בצדק, ועמים במישרים זמרו.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
My name is Rabbi Sarah Paris, and on behalf of all of us at Congregation Emanu-El, I am so excited to welcome you to our special Shabbat together. I'm looking forward to praying and singing with all of you tonight.
We're so honored to have Rabbi Gary Zola in the house, who will be our teacher tonight to kick off our Holman Grand weekend here of learning. And that all of you are in the minyan, whether here in person or online. It's a bracha, a blessing for us to learn together. This Shabbat is the Shabbat just after Passover. Are you done with the matzah, or is there some left over in your house? Did you give it away? Well, I want to take a moment and remind us that Am Yisrael, they make it to the other side of the Sea of Reeds. They find themselves in freedom. But then they realize, or are taught, that they have to make their way to Sinai. It's not enough to be free. It has to be free with a purpose. How are you going to be God's partner in the world? And so I take a moment and say, Adonai Eloheinu ten bracha aleinu. Eternal God, share with us your blessing. May this Shabbat be a Shabbat of renewal, so we can step forward closer to our Sinai, closer to living by our values and helping this country, helping this world be a place that it's meant to be. Amen.
Amen.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. And one of our newest partners in that grand task in life is Jeremy Fuchs, who's going to be celebrating his bar mitzvah this weekend, tomorrow morning, with me and Cantor Addie. So I'm going to invite Jeremy and his family up to ignite our Shabbat candles. He's worked so hard reaching this day, and I know that the light of his Torah is going to fill his family and friends' lives tomorrow morning.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu le'chadlik ner shel Shabbat.
Mazel tov to all of you. Wow. Well, we're continuing with our L'chadodi, which you can find on page 20. And be ready to welcome in the angels.
Shabbat hear the melody called Lincoln's Nigun, and it was written by a contemporary Jewish composer named Joey Weisenberg. And he was influenced by Civil War America, particularly by how President Lincoln, the soldiers would part to the left and the right, Emanu-El, and it was a sign of respect. And for us, we part Emanu-El when we welcome Shabbat. So this is in honor of Gary Zola, who's teaching us tonight. Boi b'shalom, ateret bala, gam b'tzivcha, u'b'sof olam, am segulam, lo yichala, lo yichala, lo yichala, olecha dodi likrat kala, b'nei Shabbat nekabela, olecha dodi likrat kala, b'nei Shabbat nekabela, ya la 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 la, ya la la, ya
You know, Cantor Addie, who's our band tonight? Who's
we
here?
have Dan Zimmelman on the keyboard, we have Colin Marian and on violin, and Eric Schoen, and we're so blessed to have all of you lifting us up with your sweet music.
And we have your ruach as well, your spirit as well. So take a moment and greet someone you didn't come in with and say good Shabbos and welcome their ruach to shul here.
Not yet, not yet.
Once you have greeted your new friends, you may be seated. And we are going to continue welcoming in the Malachei HaShabbat, the Shabbat angels, the spirit of Shabbat, with Shalom Aleichem on page 24.
Shalom Aleichem.
rise now together for our Barhu, our official call to worship on page 28.
Am I awake? Am I prepared? Are you listening to my prayer? Can you hear my voice? Do you understand? Am I awake? Am I prepared? Am I awake? Am I prepared? Are you listening to my prayer? Can you hear my voice? Do you understand? Am I awake? Am I prepared? Barechu et Adonai HaMeforach. Baruch Adonai HaMeforach Le'olam Va'ed. Yalla la la la, 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 yalla la la.
We're taught to have kavanah, to make a line of connection as we get ready to say the words of Shema on page 34, but you don't really need the book. So put the book aside for a moment and just center yourself. Take a deep breath. And we get ready to connect with that one.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed.
Hear, O Israel, Adonai is our God, Adonai is one. Blessed is God's glorious majesty forever and ever. Amen. We can be seated. The next part of the Shema really is the Ve'ahavta on the next page, 36.
And you sound so beautiful tonight. It's so sweet to hear your voices. Why don't you lead us in the Ve'ahavta? I'll start you. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol le'avcha b'chol nafshecha u'b'chol yadecha ve'hayinu Adonai ha'eleh Hashem Elohim mitzavecha hayom ad levavecha v'shimanta levavecha v'shitecha v'vestecha v'lechtecha v'derech v'shochtecha v'kumecha v'shartam le'ot yadecha v'hayu l'totafot bein einecha וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי אתם קדושים לאלוהיכם אני אדוני אלוהיכם אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים
So we just finished the festival of Passover, which of course commemorates the exodus from Egypt. And our next prayer, the Mi Chamocha, was what the Israelites said on that exodus. It was a prayer of exclamation, thanking God for freedom and for the miracles that God worked on the way out of Egypt as they stepped into the sea that magically had parted. We're going to pray the Mi Chamocha together on page 40.
Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi kamocha nehedar b'kodesh, nora tehilot osei feleh, nora tehilot osei. Let's do that again. Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi kamocha nehedar b'kodesh, nora tehilot osei feleh, nora tehilot osei feleh. מלכותך רעובניך בוקי הים, לפני משה ומרים. זה עלינו ויאמרו, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד. מי כמוך באלים אדוני, מי כמוך נהדר בקודש, נורא תהילות עושה פלא, נורא תהילות עושה פלא.
With our hearts filled with gratitude, we are going to take a moment to pray for the healing of those in our lives who need a little extra TLC, healing of body, of mind, or of spirit. This week, in particular, as a congregation, we are praying for the healing of Rusty Holden, Patrick Powell, Allison Kramer, Peter Logan, Daphne Burns, Steve Lewis, Mallory Klungveit, Keith Bauman, Rita Semmel, Susan Montana, Andrew Jennings, Ariella Gila, Gilbert H. Young, John Whelan, Jameson Hunt, Marsha Bruston Lang, Dave Berman, and Maddie Humphreys. If there is someone else on your mind who you would like to send prayers of healing to, please share their name with our community as my tallest passes over you. And together we all pray for healing with the words of Debbie Friedman on page 253, the Misha Beirach.
מי שברך אבותינו מכל הברכה לאמותינו. May the source of strength who bless the ones before us help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say Amen. מי שברך אמותינו מכל הברכה לאבותינו. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say
So, as Rabbi Jonathan alluded to at the start of the service, we are in the journey from slavery in Egypt to receiving the Torah at Sinai. That period of time is known as the counting of the Omer. It is a spiritual journey getting ourselves ready to receive the Torah. And there's a practice of saying a blessing and actually counting the physical days or literal days that we are passing throughout this 7-week period. So tonight marks the start of the 9th day of the Omer, the 2nd day of the 2nd week. Each day and each week of the Omer correspond to one of the Kabbalistic sfirot. And this week focuses on gvura, which is strength or discipline, discernment, boundaries, something in that space. It's hard to translate. So tonight, as we are about to count the Omer and go into the Hashkivenu, which is our prayer asking God for protection and guidance each night, we are going to take a moment together to reflect on our own strength and our own boundaries and limitations. It's really important for us to use our strength intentionally and judiciously, and to give our attention to what needs and deserves it, and not allow ourselves to be overwhelmed or spread too thinly just because of what's going on in the world around us. Where are you feeling pulled right now? What is taking your strength and your energy? Where do you want to focus your attention to fill your cup back up this Shabbat and restore your strength? How can we find this balance together? Hayom tisha yamim shehem shavua echad v'sheni yamim la'omer. Today is 9 days, which is 1 week and 2 days of the Omer.
Sing with me. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al sfirat haomer, like this. Al sfirat haomer, 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 al sfirat
And now we're going to slowly dim the lights for our Hashkivenu prayer. We're going to be joining together on page 42.
Hashkifenu Adonai Eloheinu leshalom Hamidenu shomreinu lechaim Hashkifenu Adonai Eloheinu leshalom Hamidenu shomreinu lechaim
We're on page 46. We rise for the Amidah as the lights come up. We'll do the first 3 prayers together and then have a chance to just be on our own. And of course, a reminder that here in California especially, we're no longer praying for Geshem. No more rain. We're switching to Dal to do. Page 46.
Adonai sefatai tiftach ufi yagi tehillatcha. Adonai, open up my lips, that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu v'Elohei avoteinu v'imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, v'Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel v'Elohei Leah, Ha'el HaGadol HaGibor v'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, v'Konei HaKol, v'Zocher Chasdei Avot v'Imachot, u'mei Geulah libnei b'nechem, למען שמו באהבה, מלך עוזר ומושיע ומגן. ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן אברהם ועזרת שרה. אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, בחיי הכל אתה רב להושיע, מוריד הטל, מכלכל חיים בחסד, מחייך הכל ברחמים רבים, סומך נופלים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו בלי שני עפר. מי כמוך בגבורות ומי דומה לך, מלך ממית ומחיה ומצמיח ישועה, ונאמן אתה לחיות הכל. ברוך אתה אדוני בחייך הכל. אתה קדוש ושמך קדוש, וקדושים בכל יום יהללוך סלה. ברוך אתה אדוני האל הקדוש. In your programs, I think on the back page of your Shabbat handout are some lyrics, it's, does everybody see it? Ben Adam. Ben Adam. Oh, thank you. It's so beautiful. The Hebrew is so beautiful. We all know that I could go on forever about these words, but just to take the word Adam, because we all know the name Adam. But Adam in Hebrew, in one way, means man, and Ben Adam means son of man, or we could just say humanity. It's also like saying in Hebrew, yeah, Ben Adam. It's like, hey, man. But Ben Adam, and it says Ale. Everybody say Ale.
Ale,
Lemala.
lemala,
Ale.
ale.
It says rise up. Ale lemala. Same. You can hear it's the same root. Ale lemala. Rise up to the high place. And it's a beautiful text. So it says, rise up, humanity. And it goes on to say that we have, in Hebrew it's going to say that we have wings of spirit that are here for us, like wings of a precious, like an eagle. Nisharim adirim, precious eagle wings. And then it says, it's so beautiful, it says, don't deny them, al tekachesh bam, or they will deny you. But if you seek them, they are immediately there for you. So we say, Ben Adam, alei lemala alei, alei lemala alei, Ben Adam, alei lemala alei. You sound so nice. Ben Adam, alei lemala alei, alei lemala alei, Ben Adam, alei lemala alei. כי כוח עז לך, יש לך כנפי רוח, יש לך כנפי רוח, כנפי נשרים אדירים, אל תכחש בם, פן יכחשו בך, דרוש אותם, דרוש בן אדם, וימצאו מיד. בן אדם, עלי למעלה עלי, עלי למעלה עלי, בן אדם, עלי למעלה עלי. בן אדם, עלי למעלה עלי, עלי למעלה עלי, בן אדם, עלי למעלה עלי. כי כוח עז לך, יש לך כנפי רוח, יש לך כנפי רוח, כנפי נשרים אדירים, אל תכחש בם, פן יכחשו בך, דרוש אותם, דרוש בן אדם, וימצאו מיד. בן אדם, עלי למעלה עלי, עלי למעלה עלי, בן אדם, עלי למעלה עלי. בן אדם, עלי למעלה עלי, עלי למעלה עלי, בן אדם, עלי למעלה עלי.
With this new setup, I have the new job of being a schlepper.
And I'm schlepping with you.
Hevre, we are so blessed to have Dr. Rabbi Gary Zola as our scholar in residence, our Holman Grand scholar in residence. We want to thank the Holman Grand family for making this happen. He is a practitioner of the art. You know, it's one thing to save the old and to preserve it. It's another thing to take the old and help it inform and inspire the new and show us where we've been and where we might be inspired to go. And that's what Rabbi Zola does as the head of the American Jewish Archives in Cincinnati, Ohio, but also as a nationally respected teacher and historian who is a teacher of rabbis, as well as the larger community. And we are so thrilled to have him here. He has other things on his resume. He was the dean of admissions of the Hebrew College. I think he still wants to get credit for our rabbi-to-be, Leo Fuchs, for coming this way. But there were a few years and trails in between. But here you are, and we're so proud of you and your family, and welcome your dad and your mom here to make this Shabbat and celebrate as well and learn from Rabbi Gary Zola. So we're going to break a rule and give a hand to him, everybody.
Well, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. It's really a great honor to be here at Temple Emanu-El. Anybody who knows and loves the history of the American Jewish experience knows about the history of this distinguished congregation. And although I've had the privilege of being here on a few occasions over the years, it's always a great thrill to be here because I'm thinking always of the history that I learned about this congregation and so many of its leaders over the course of so many years. Before I speak a little this evening about the topic on which I promised to hold forth, like any good clergy person, before I speak, I have something to say. So I do want to express my heartfelt gratitude for the invitation to come and be with you this weekend. I also want to add my word of appreciation to the rabbis for the Holman Grand family that has made this possible. You know, there are many, many congregations in this country who would love to have scholar-in-residence programs and don't have that benefit. And it's just a wonderful thing over the years. It's been so enriching to my rabbinate because as a teacher of rabbis, the opportunity to be in the community and to see what's going on inside the congregations and to share a little bit about what it is that I do, it's been very enriching, and I'm very grateful to the family. I'm also very honored to be here with my long-time friend and colleague, Rabbi Singer. I noticed Rabbi Singer did not mention the role that I played in bringing his wife and Rabbi Singer, the other Rabbi Singer, together when I was Dean of Admissions. I'll let that pass, and anyone who wants to ask about that during the Oneg, I'll be happy to fill you in. But there's so many of my rabbinic friends out in the community, in the congregation this evening. It's wonderful to see all of you. I do want to say that this is perhaps a hangover from my years as Dean of Admissions. You know, it's very easy, friends, for a person like myself to come into a congregation and to speak about a topic that I write about and that I study, and I have the great privilege of actually being in the world's greatest center for research on American Jewish history, my field. For heaven's sakes, I don't even have to get the material myself. I can ask people to bring it to me. And then I come and I can teach on something I'm familiar with, and then I leave. And that's sort of like being a visiting fireman. But the single most important task in the rabbinate is the congregational rabbi, our Klei Kodesh, our rabbis and our cantors. And I've been on this theme lately, how important it is for us never to take our religious leaders for granted. We assume that there will always be talented people who are able to do what I'm not able to do. They are here week in and week out. They're here for happy occasions and sad occasions. They cannot repeat their lessons because many of you are here regularly, and therefore they constantly have to study and learn and grow. And it was Isaac Mayer Wise, the founder of the Hebrew Union College, who realized that if we don't raise up our own North American rabbis, our community won't sustain itself. And that perspective, that observation is as valid today as it was in the mid-19th century. And so we should always cherish those who are in the community and leading our congregations. I do want to thank Rabbi Singer and salute you, and I hope you'll pass that on to Beth, Rabbi Paris, soon to be Rabbi Fuchs, Senior Rabbi Fuchs, and of course, Cantor Ati, who sang so beautifully. I want you to fill me in on the Lincoln music, which you taught me something this evening. So Shabbat Shalom, friends. Friends, 150 years ago, to this very day, just after the arrival of Shabbat, Chol Hamoed Pesach, John Wilkes Booth shot President Abraham Lincoln in Ford's Theater while Lincoln watched a special performance of the popular farcical comedy, Our American Cousin. A group of soldiers carried Lincoln across 10th Street to Peterson's rooming house. The president's physician was immediately called to the scene. Shortly after the doctor arrived, he informed the entourage that had gathered that the president's prognosis was hopeless. At 7:22 the following morning, April the 15th, 1865, Shabbat Chol Hamoed Pesach, Abraham Lincoln took his last breath. Now, on that very same Shabbat morn, American Jews were filing into their synagogues to observe Sabbath services for Chol Hamoed Pesach. They were, like we just did, commemorating their exodus from Egypt and the deliverance from the house of bondage, and they were unaware, as they filed into their synagogues, of the catastrophe that had befallen the nation. But toward the conclusion of the worship service, on that fateful Sabbath, the bad news began to spread. In Cincinnati's B'nai Israel congregation, the Queen City's oldest synagogue, an usher ran to the bima and handed Rabbi Dr. Max Lilienthal a note informing him that Abraham Lincoln had been assassinated. The distinguished rabbi blanched as he read the shocking, tragic news. According to contemporaneous accounts, the rabbi's tears prevented him from speaking. Finally, after he regained his composure, Lilienthal looked out at the congregation and quoted a famous verse that comes from the book of Samuel. Halo tedu, ki sar v'gadol nafal hayom hazeh b'Yisrael. A prince and a great man of Israel has fallen on this day. Lilienthal's very sorrowful outcry is emblematic, friends, of the grief that overtook the nation, and especially the American Jewish community. If it is true, as some have claimed, that Bill Clinton was the first black president, it can be effectively argued that Abraham Lincoln was the first Jewish president. Now, Lincoln was not, of course, not halachically speaking, a Jew. But even before he ascended to the presidency, many Jews in the Northwest Territory, which we call today the Great Midwest, knew Lincoln personally as a friend and as an unbiased neighbor. And especially from the time of Lincoln's untimely death, a large portion of the American Jewish community actively promoted the apotheosis of Abraham Lincoln, For many of our Jewish forebears, Lincoln was not only the savior of the Union, not only the emancipator of the slaves, not only the great commoner, he was catapulted into the role of being an honorary Jew, an almost chosen person. Now, this conviction has conferred Lincoln with a very unique status. Over the decades, the 16th president has become a sort of non-Jewish Jew. No non-Jewish American figure, no matter how beloved or revered, has ever matched Lincoln's enduring legacy among American Jews who have come to believe, as it says in the book of Genesis, Hu haya ke'echad mimenu. Lincoln was, for all intents and purposes, one of us. Now, this teaching seems particularly fetching and relevant on this Shabbat, when our nation observes the 158th yahrzeit of Lincoln's passing, at least on the Gregorian calendar, and Lincoln's career somehow always seems timely, but in light of the strife and the partisanship that dominates American culture today, Lincoln's own era seems so very relevant. Now, it just so happens that this week's portion, part of which I'm sure Jeremy will be reading to us, the Sidra Parshat Shmini, offers several moral lessons that testify to the ways in which Lincoln's ethical instincts always seem to align with Jewish axiology, our Jewish spiritual legacy. This week's portion explains, as some of you know, the operation of the tabernacle in the wilderness. In this portion, we learn about the appointment and the duties of the priesthood and the outlining of their responsibilities as religious leaders, and also the tragic, fateful consequences of flawed or failed leadership. And then the portion ends by outlining Judaism's famous, well-known dietary laws, the laws of kashrut. So this evening, let's consider briefly 3 examples of how Lincoln's ethical legacy seems to reinforce the moral lessons which naturally arise from this week's portion. First, we will be reading about the troubling saga of Aaron's sons, Nadav and Abihu, who seemingly brought an undescribed but obviously abominable sacrificial offering to the tabernacle. And their flawed leadership provoked a divine fire that consumed these 2 men. Aaron, their father, his famous reaction to the loss of his offspring was profound and arresting, unforgettable. Vayidom Aharon. Aaron was silent. Why was Aaron speechless? One of the most insightful explanations comes from an ancient Talmudic sage named Rabbi Yossi, who concluded that the silence is a mode of consolation. Rabbi Yossi explains, Aaron had sons, and they perished tragically on the same day, both of them. And we know that he immediately received comfort because the Torah teaches Yidom Aharon. Aaron was silent. And Rabbi Yossi continues, Ein shetika ela tanchunim. There is nothing in silence other than comfort and consolation. There's a story about Rabbi Benjamin Zold of Baltimore. That Benjamin Zold is the father of the famous Henrietta Zold, the founder of Hadassah. Zold actually met Abraham Lincoln on one or two occasions, and in describing Lincoln later in life to his students, Rabbi Zold told them a story that illustrated Lincoln's ethical compass and his ability to remain silent. Zold claimed that he once accompanied a very poor immigrant woman to the White House so she could beseech the president to pardon her beloved son. Evidently, the poor young man had been convicted of desertion. And according to Zold, the immigrant woman pleaded with the president. And in this process, she began to pour out her heart before the president. And she became so emotional that she switched to her native tongue, Yiddish. Now, Lincoln, of course, did not understand a word of what this woman was saying to her. But according to Zold, Lincoln sat and listened quietly. He listened to her unintelligible, to him, yet piteous appeal. And Zold said Lincoln never took his eyes off her face. And Zold told his students that when she was done, he saw tears running down the president's cheek. In Pirkei Avot, we're taught, Kol yamai gadalti bein hachachamim velo matzati laguf tov ela shitika, which in English means, all my days I grew up among the greatest of sages, but I have found nothing better for a human being than silence. Like Aaron the priest, Lincoln's silence, his patience, manifest his compassion and his caring, a precious ability to empathize even with someone he didn't understand, but could see the person was overwhelmed with sorrow. A second lesson comes to us with regard to the dietary laws that are outlined in this week's portion. Our text teaches that there are several birds that must never be eaten, but of course, there's no explanation as to why they are forbidden. So the learned 13th century commentator, Nachmanides, the Ramban, offered a very famous explanation that many have heard. He taught that the reason we're prohibited from eating birds such as crows or magpies or ravens, penguins, and storks are because these birds behave cruelly and vindictively toward their fellow birds. Yet, a very clever student with red hair must have challenged Ramban and said, wait a minute. How could that possibly apply to the stork? After all, what is the Hebrew name for the stork? The Hebrew name for the stork is the Hasidah, which literally means the righteous one, kind one, benevolent, gracious. The Ramban's explanation made no sense then. If the bird is a sweet bird, why has it been called, according to the Torah, detestable and an abomination? Thank goodness for the Hasidim, because they've solved this riddle for us. because the Hasidic masters elucidate on the Ramban's explanation. And they say, well, the Ramban was correct, but only up to a point. The stork is gracious to its friends, but not to strangers. And that is why we cannot eat the stork, because it may be kind to its fellow storks, but it is not kind to stranger birds. And thus we learn that kindness and caring and benevolence must be shown not only to our own camp, but to people outside the camp. Abraham Lincoln was an exemplar of this teaching. A 19th century famous artist by the name of Francis Carpenter, who painted many of Lincoln's portraitures, recorded in his memoirs an interesting encounter that he witnessed at the White House in 1863. Carpenter recalled hearing a member of Congress ask President Lincoln why Lincoln had never elected to join a particular church or a religious denomination. Carpenter could not help but overhear the president's reply. Lincoln's response to the congressman's query has been quoted frequently over the years. This is what Lincoln supposedly said: "I have found difficulty, without mental reservation, in giving my assent to their long and complicated confessions of faith. However, if there was a church that had inscribed over its altar this condensed statement of the law and the gospel, 'Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy might, and also love thy neighbor as thyself,' that church I would join with all my heart." The great sage Hillel coined a central tenet to all religions: "That which is hateful to you, do not do to your fellow." This rule applies to every human being, not only those whom we love and with whom we have communion. It applies to all humankind. And finally, our portion informs us that Aaron lifted up his hands toward the people of Israel and blessed them. The text says, "Sa Aharon et yadav el ha'am vayevarachem." The privilege of being a source of blessing is always and forever associated to Aaron and the priesthood, who of course must offer this benison in love. A contemporary story that appears in a book by a writer and journalist named Andrew Ferguson illustrates that Lincoln's own memory, the way we idealize him, can also serve as a puissant source of blessing and hope. Ferguson says that he took a trip to Springfield, Illinois in 2005 when he was researching a book that he was writing on Lincoln. And in Springfield, Illinois, he stayed at the Hilton, which is located right across the street from the new Lincoln Museum in Springfield. At the Hilton, Ferguson struck up a conversation about President Lincoln with the hotel's manager. The manager's name was Frank Walker. Walker then told Ferguson that a few weeks prior to Ferguson's visit to Springfield, a very elderly and feeble man by the name of Henry Dubin had been at the Hilton. Dubin, Walker said, had great difficulty getting around. He was elderly, and he was apparently suffering from Parkinson's. The elderly man told the hotel manager that he had been waiting to visit Springfield for more than 45 years. He explained that he had come to Springfield to visit Lincoln's tomb so that he could pay his respects to the famous president. Ferguson recounts an amazing story that the hotel manager told him in 2005. Noticing his guest's frailty, the manager Walker volunteered to take Dubin to Oak Ridge Cemetery rather than leave the poor man to do so on his own. And at the cemetery, he escorted Mr. Dubin into the tomb, where the hotel manager witnessed his guest becoming overwrought and emotional. The man cried and cried and wept as if Lincoln was his own father. There was silence. They got back into the car, and on the way home, the curious hotel manager inquired, "Why was this such an emotional experience for you?" Mr. Dubin told the manager that as a young boy, he had been incarcerated in a concentration camp in Germany. He pulled up his sleeve when he said this, and every time he said the word concentration camp, he pulled up his sleeve to show the manager the identification number that had been tattooed on his forearm. And then the hotel manager recited exactly what Dubin told him, and I quote it to you. "When I was in the concentration camp, and I was all alone in my room, it was the worst time in my life, and I didn't think I could survive. But then Mr. Lincoln came to me. Mr. Lincoln stood right in front of me, just like I'm standing here in front of you. And Mr. Lincoln said to me, 'You must never forget. You must never forget all men are created equal. This is true for all men and for all time. And these men who would do this to you, who would put you here, they are no better than you. You are their equal, because all were created equal. You must keep remembering this. You must persevere. You must. And then you'll be all right.' And it was this vision of Lincoln that Mr. Dubin says inspired him to persevere. And he vowed that if he did survive, that before his life ended, he would one day go to Springfield and thank President Lincoln personally. The psalmist reminds us that the Eternal One depends upon all of us to raise up those who are bowed down. Well, perhaps, friends, this is why American Jews have so long been inspirited by Lincoln's legacy and life. For they have continuously been steeled by a sense that this idealized Lincoln could potentially lift the spirits in every generation. And this conviction, the belief that Lincoln is the paradigmatic exemplar of the very best of our Jewish ethical heritage, is something that can inspire us and has inspired us from generation to generation. And so, friends, this evening and tomorrow, as we mark, together with the nation, the 158th yahrzeit of Abraham Lincoln's passing, let's conclude by calling to mind the eerily timeless words he spoke only weeks before he left us in that second inaugural address. With malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all the nations. Our ancient rabbis have taught us any sage whose name is mentioned in a teaching and is recorded as such, of this sage it should be said, his lips still move from the grave. Indeed, Lincoln's lips still speak to us today. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Mr. Carr, beautiful story. So wonderful, wonderful. Wow. Well, friends, I think you can see why we're so grateful to have Rabbi Zola here as our teacher. We've tried for 3 years to get him to come, and COVID got in the way. It's so great to have all of you here as well. And for us to be able to think about how we weave Jewish life and our identity, and remember that we're part of the fabric of American history and our American experience, our American Jewish experience. I'll be taking 23 kids from the temple next week on a tour of heritage tour of Jewish New York. And we'll stop at the Hebrew Union College and visit there as well. I hope you'll learn with us throughout the weekend. And again, Bruchim Haba'im, welcome, welcome, Rabbi Zola. We get ready now to come to the concluding part of our services as we get ready now to say Kaddish. And you can find the Kaddish prayer in your prayer book. But before we say those words of Kaddish on page 294, of course, our hearts go out to these families who are in the midst of mourning, the Shloshim, the month of recent loss, as they mourn Ruth Horlick, our teacher and friend, Rabbi Edward Zarin, Eleanor P. Brenner, and then we add those who were murdered in Israel, this family, Lucy D., Maya D., Rena D. May their families be comforted in their presence of friends, and maybe in their silence too. It's also the yahrzeit, the anniversary of the passing of these loved ones. May their memory be an abiding blessing. We honor the memory of Harry Abels, Isaac Abramson, Louis Aronow, Elaine Balin, Jerry Balin, Vendel Kivi Aho Belway, Rebecca Brandt, Rose Breger, Norman Burnham, Stafford Calvin, Claude Chikri, Margaret Cooper, Gertrude Cooper, Marvin Kavinsky, Maurice Eliezer, Norman Friedman, Cindy Gaudier, Ann Gore, Ilya Eliyahu Gordon, Helen Boyard Hootkins, Gary G. Cardos, Mark Katz, Isaac Kodak, Presley Kirk, Harvey Levine, Robert B. Leans, Leo Lehrberger, Jack Leonard, Rose Levin, Alan Lipsett, Marion Lipton, Rosalie Mylans, Arthur Mintz, Joshua Moldow, Mark Ozer, Henrietta C. Pick, Mildred Radlow, William Rann, Samuel S. Revo, Marie Louise Rosenberg, Aaron Rosenthal, Blanche Hellman Sachs, Julia Sachs, Leona Salzman, Florence Schwartz, Miriam Siegel, Herbert Shapiro, Sarah Scheinfield, Geraldine Sicular, Edward Slater, Larry Sunshine, Steffi Tick, Marshall Tillen, Albert Upton, and Magda Ziegler. If you're here to say Kaddish for someone whose name wasn't mentioned, as I point my talit in your direction, please call out that name of that loved one. On page 294, we rise for Kaddish. Yitgadal v'yikadash shemei Rabbah, ve'alma divrach chirutei v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayachon v'yimechon v'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael, b'agala v'zman kari v'yamru. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevarach le'alam umei almaya, Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei d'kudsha b'richu, Leila min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'ne'amata.
We are on page number 5 for the Kiddush, and let's bring a microphone down for Jeremy. Let's join together.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshonu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu, v'shabbat kodsho be'ahava uvratzon hinhilanu, zikaron l'maseh v'reshit, ki hu yom tehila l'mikra kodesh, zeher litziat mitzrayim, ki vanu v'harta v'yotanu kidashta mikol ha'amim, v'shabbat kodshecha be'ahava uvratzon hinhaltanu. Baruch atah Adonai mekadesh hashavat.
L'chaim.
As Rabbi Singer mentioned, this is just the beginning of the Holman Grand Scholar in Residence Weekend. We have lots more learning to do with Dr. Zola. We hope you will join us. And Jeremy, we want to have you help with one last thing to help end services.
Do remember to bring your prayer books back to the prayer book cart. And tomorrow morning, 9:15, in place of Torah study, is our next section with Rabbi Zola. And we look forward to that. And also Sunday morning at 10 a.m. too. Put your arm around the person next to you if you want. We join together.
Baruch Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz b'te'avon. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom. Thank you for
everybody.
joining us.
Shabbat shalom.